Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is part 3 of our 2023 Outfield preview. We will try and get through the end of this position on this episode. I'm almost certain we will leave someone out because there are far more outfielders to cover than we have time to cover once you get past like pick 300. So if you got questions for a future episode, email is the best way, ratesandbarrels@theathletic.com. You can always tweet at us. We could try and answer questions in that forum as well. You know, yesterday we left off right at the back of the top 200 overall. Riley Greene is the first player right now among outfielders who currently misses the cut. And I started thinking about Riley Greene in the context of other recent rookies, most specifically Jared Kelenic and Dylan Carlson. I think because there's a little bit of a gap between Riley Greene and some of the expectations people had for Julio Rodriguez and at other positions, Bobby Witt Jr., even though Rodriguez was pretty affordable last year. Greene's in a spot where it's not going to hurt you to draft him if you're wrong, but should Jared Kelenic and Dylan Carlson be instructive in this case as guys that we thought were really polished that are taking more time than expected to become consistently viable fantasy contributors?
Yeah, there's actually kind of an interesting continuum between the three because you've got Jared Kelenic, who has wicked contact problems and specific holes in the zone. Breaking balls low are an issue for him. And then you've got Riley Greene. Who's the third one again? Was
Dylan Carlson.
Dylan Carlson. Dylan Carlson has a great plate approach. You know, contact rate is great. No bad ball oomph at all. Kelenic has pretty good batted ball oomph. And I think Riley's in between. I was almost on a Riley no draft. You might have heard in the last episode that I was picking people pretty willy-nilly over Riley, and that I wasn't super into him. But I've looked a little closer, and it's not as bad as I thought. The strikeout rate is bad, but a 9.8% swinging strike rate suggests that he could actually bring that down. The projections are he's going to bring that down. If he brings it down to 25, 26, major league average, you kind of have to recalibrate it. But major league average is approaching 23, you know? So all of a sudden it's just a slightly worse strikeout rate than usual and not like a really terrible one. And, you know, Dylan Carlson has like, I don't know, I'm not looking right now, but like a 3% barrel rate or something. It's awful batted ball stats. Dylan Carlson had a 9% barrel rate last year, 112 max EV. So the raw power is there. You know, I'm not saying that he's, you know, the projections are only for below average power, but he showed good power in the minor leagues. And the underlying sort of process stats aren't as bad as his results. I don't know where the 7 stolen bases are coming from, honestly. That seems to be reaching back all the way to 2021 AA, where he stole 12 bags. But in terms of a late guy that could have some power upside, I think I pick Riley out of the 3.
Yeah, I think there's enough things he does well. The stolen bases, he was 21 for 22 in his first 2 minor league seasons. That was 2019 and 2021 combined across a bunch of levels. And then had an injury, of course, that cost him time, delayed his arrival last year with Detroit, stole a few bases in the minors during his time at AAA, and then was 1 for 5 in limited opportunities with the Tigers. I don't know if that's enough to say he's getting red lights, but I think it's a good reminder that when you look at the tools, this is a guy that Riley Greene got a 40 speed grade from Fangraphs, right? So I think the lesson is don't expect more than low double-digit steals if you're going to be optimistic about him, and don't be surprised if it takes a little time for him to pick his spots and start doing that.
I'm not going to faith cast him into 10 even.
No need to do that. But I think it's a little bit like what we were talking about with Bryan Reynolds, where Reynolds' line is very good in the context of last year. Riley Greene hit a 253, 321, 362 line. That was a 98 WRC plus. That was almost league average. It's still jarring months and months after we first started seeing this run environment. You're like, that really? Check that math again. But for his age, for the fact that he had that delayed start to the season because of the injury, I think Riley Greene's rookie season was actually borderline successful. I think that's kind of a reasonable expectation. So even a small step forward would make him a decent value here. I think
something that you can watch that becomes useful early on. Ground ball rate is something that stabilizes early for hitters. He had a too high ground ball rate last year, but lower numbers in the minor leagues. So if you draft him and he's piddling along with a 250, hasn't hit a homer yet, and you don't know what to do with him on your roster, you can look at his ground ball rate. And if it's over 50%, maybe it's just not going to be his year. If it's under 50%, I hate to make it so binary, but if it's under 50%, it's closer to where he was in the minors when he showed better power. So that's something. It's nice to have that like late, sixth. What is it? What are we in now? Fifth outfielder at least.
At least fourth, if not fifth, depending on how you're playing.
I'd rather pick him as a sixth outfielder. But if it's my fifth outfielder and he's part of a package of players that I hope become my fifth outfielder every day, and he's on my bench or in the early going and hitting 55% ground balls, I'm going to let him go. The one nice aspect to his candidacy is that Detroit did change the walls, and they brought the walls down almost through most of the park to 7 feet. It's kind of a home run robbing height, but it also will allow more homers out. They also brought the walls in center, so it's going to play a little bit more fair. And that's going to help Riley Greene. So there's a couple reasons to draft him. I wouldn't want him as my fourth outfielder. And, as my fifth, I'd want him as a package of players. I would want an outfielder on my bench behind him. I'd want him to be part of 2 or 3 players that I thought could help me. Alex Verdugo goes right behind him. And Alex Verdugo has a much higher floor. And I know it's not very power friendly, but in a league where the batting average just keeps dropping every year, I see Alex Verdugo as a great pick for a fourth or fifth outfielder. Almost a virtual lock to hit 280 plus, could hit 300. And I don't think 11 to 15 homers is as much of a zero as we might think it is in our heads. So Verdugo is somebody I think I'd much rather have, especially if it's like for my fourth outfielder.
I believe it was our friend Ariel Cohen who was saying that going into last season, Verdugo was on the short list of players that actually projected to have a positive impact in all 5 roto categories. Hard to find guys that are that balanced. Maybe he narrowly misses that now. But
took a step back with the speed, it looks like.
But the general idea of what he still could be with a step forward, I think it's still there. And the step down was pretty small relatively. I mean, the speed was always
still hit 280, he still hit 280 and was above average probably in runs and RBI or around average. I mean, he went from being above average in all categories to being close to average,
Yeah. Probably didn't hurt you where he went. So I think he makes sense as a similar kind of player here. He's a guy that you can trust the playing time with a bit more. Kind of sandwiched between Greene and Verdugo, Joey Meneses, who also has first base eligibility. So you might find that you like him as a corner, but flexibility is nice. Initially,
draft champions,
Yeah, initially when I saw Joey Meneses come up and have that late season success, I thought this is Frank Schwindel. And the more I've looked at him, the less I actually believe that comp holds up. I think Meneses is better. I think there is more evidence of consistent power from him, even though he's been very old for the level in the upper levels, the minor leagues, mostly playing at AAA since 2018. I think there's a better chance Meneses sticks in an everyday role with the Nationals all season than there was for Schwindel to stick in an everyday role for the Cubs a year ago. It doesn't mean he won't lose his job. It just means I think these core skills are probably better than I was giving them credit for initially when I first started looking at the profile.
Yeah, he hits the ball harder than Schwindel ever did. And the team is maybe even more of a mess than the Cubs ever were. And thirdly, the park is nicer to power than Chicago's. So I could see it. It's a little bit like that Jake McCarthy situation where there is the risk that he doesn't play. However, if there is anything more actionable, we've been talking about having players that are on that fifth outfield or bench spot, having players that you can pick that what you're looking for, how to drop them early. It's super easy with Meneses, right? The playing time guys are actually kind of one of the best ways to put guys on your bench. If he's playing, well, he's probably going to be good. If he's not playing, I know I can drop him in week 2.
Yeah. The small move they made, they added Corey Dickerson to the mix. And Dickerson's a lefty. Meneses is a righty. They've also added Dominic Smith, who can play some first base. So they've got a couple guys in there that can take big side platoon roles. Even with both of them, Meneses does have a spot atop the depth chart right now at DH. And even with those additions, Lane Thomas has a spot. So it's like Meneses versus himself versus Lane Thomas versus those guys. And then kind of fourth, fifth outfielder types from a major league perspective, like Alex Call and Stone Garrett. It's not an intimidating group of players trying to take away that time.
There are Jake Alou backers. We discussed Jake Alou back in the review portion, even though he was much better discussed in the preview portion. He's kind of missing a glove. But in terms of making contact, showing decent amount of patience, showing a decent amount of power and speed, Jake Alou is fairly exciting. I know Fangraphs puts a 40 future value on him, but it's a little bit about the fact that he doesn't really have a glove. Fantasy only cares about the glove to the extent that will he play? And now that the DH is ubiquitous in the league, I feel like Alou has a place to land no matter what if he hits. Second base, probably I would try Jake Alou at second base first because I'm not that much of a Luis Garcia backer. I don't know that Vargas is any good. And so I'd try him there. But, DH is a place they may bring him up to play. May play him in the outfield. This is a depth chart that is going to change. This is a depth chart that's in upheaval. And that makes for a lot of opportunity. I always love going to bad teams and being like, ooh, this is the guy I believe in. I think Meneses is actually one of the guys I believe in, in this group. I think Candelario will bounce back, and I think he's better than Kieboom and, the most natural third baseman. So Candelario and Meneses are a little bit old, but they're maybe the best players on this team. Honestly, best hitters, I think. Abrams can't hit the ball hard. Luis Garcia never walks. That becomes a problem over time. Lane Thomas is pretty decent, but he's also doesn't have much ceiling. And Victor Robles is playing his way out of ball as I see it. And then Stone Garrett is a threat to any of the outfielders if they just decide to give him full time. Dickerson's a weird sign for me. He's a bad ball hitter who's 33 and hasn't been above average with the bat for 3 years. Isn't really that much of an asset with the glove. I wouldn't bet on him.
You mentioned being interested in digging through bad teams' rosters. This is a great spot to do it, this cluster in terms of ADP. For those wondering, Whit Merrifield will be discussed on the second base preview because second base is a dumpster fire, and you're going to want to play him at second base. If you end up drafting him this year or play him in the middle infield. The A's have several outfielders here. Seth Brown is in this range, does have first base eligibility to go with it. Ramón Laureano, who I like quite a bit. And just a little further down, about 20 to 30 picks later, is Esteury Ruiz, who's been discussed on this show quite a bit. So when you start looking at how the pieces fit in Oakland and you look at what these guys have done over the brief time, in the case of Ruiz, they've been in the big leagues, and the longer times they've been in the big leagues for Laureano and Seth Brown, how do you see them kind of holding their jobs or being utilized by the A's? Are they all pretty clear to max volume playing time?
I guess so. Seth Brown was already in trade rumors. It seems pretty quick to playing your way out of Oakland. I think he had one good year. The DH situation is fairly unsettled. We've got Noda there, who is, I think, a Rule 5 or just like a waiver pickup. And he's been interesting, but he's been interesting for so long that he's 26 years old. and gives me sometimes the sort of Kyle Kalua vibes where it's
a blast from the past.
Well, just like really high walks. Is the contact going to be there? Is the power for real? He's maybe a little bit more of an athlete because he's stealing these bases. I don't know. He definitely somebody that will get a chance. Where is he eligible at outfield?
Noda?
Yeah.
Good
I think
question.
he's more of a deep league guy.
Yeah, I've seen him on the depth chart at first, a bunch of places.
I think it's Brown at first, Noda at DH. Laureano starts all the time. I think Pache is in the minor leagues. Ruiz starts at center. Kemp is on his way out, but I think he's the starter at second. And Capel, somebody I like pretty well. He's in left field. He's maybe one of the super cheapest guys we talked about that I think, has a good set of skills where he makes contact, has patience, enough power, enough defense. I think he's going to be the surprise guy who plays a lot in that outfield. So if Capel plays, Ruiz is going to play because he's the star acquisition. Laureano is playing to probably accrue trade value, but he's also the veteran. So I think that it might be actually fairly predictable in the outfield. Those three play most of the time. Brown at first, Noda at DH. Noda has the most collapse percentage. So there's some opportunity for is it Dermis Garcia? Is it Junior Diaz? What's
Jordan Diaz is my guy.
Diaz,
he's gonna
yeah.
Look. He didn't hit the ball hard in the little time we saw him last year. He's gonna get the chance though.
And I think he'll get the chance at third. He didn't look that great defensively at second, so he could get the chance at first behind a Seth Brown trade, at DH if Noda doesn't work out, or at third. They've got Jace Peterson there. To me, Jace Peterson profiles as a utility guy. He's 32. He's had one season where he's been above average with the bat, and that was a 61 plate appearance season. So I think he's more of a utility guy that shores up your defense. May play short if they end up sending their shortstop down, who Nick Allen is a good defender, but offensively he was 39% worse than league average last year.
Yeah, so of all these players you mentioned, I think Laureano has the safest floor, I would say, of the bunch. Like with Brown, the bottom could fall out on him, or he could get traded, and if he gets traded, I don't know if he's an everyday player on other teams. He is an everyday player so long as he's in Oakland. Ruiz is so polarizing, and I'm glad we've got more projections coming out now. So when we first started talking about him, Steamer is a little more optimistic about Esteury Ruiz.
They're optimistic about young guys forever.
Right. And the Bat X has Esteury Ruiz at 228, 291, 343, and that's an 87 WRC plus. I was like,
that's where I
expecting more than that because of the run environment, but no, 87 WRC plus, 23 steals, and that's over basically 2/3 of a season's worth of playing time. So really 30 plus steal sort of speed is what he brings. But is Ruiz going to end up being a one category player against big league pitching because of the quality of the contact that he makes?
I kind of think he is. If you look closely, you could say, oh, he walks, and that's a big differentiator between Stephen Kwan and all of the guys that have come before Stephen Kwan that had like a 3% walk rate and a 10% strikeout rate. You know what I mean? Like the fact that Stephen Kwan also walks makes him much more valuable. You look at Ruiz's line and you say, whoa, AA and AAA last year, he walked 14% of the time and struck out 17% of the time. That's really, really exciting. If you look beyond that to other stops in the minor leagues, he didn't have that walk rate. There might be something about him moving closer to the plate because his hit by pitches rate spiked. But with a 1-year spike in walk rate, I can't say that he's going to come out here and be an asset when it comes to taking walks, especially since I don't believe in the batted ball power. We've seen some minor league batted ball numbers, something like an 18% hard hit rate. So pitchers aren't going to be afraid of that. They're going to stay in the zone. He's not going to get much value out of not swinging, right? And so he's going to be aggressive. And so I believe the 6% walk rate from the Bat X much more than the 8% walk rate from Steamer. And then if the same thing happens if you look at the strikeout rate. Yes, he struck out 17% of the time last year in AA. But if you look beyond that, he had way worse contact rates on the way up. So I also believe that 24% strikeout rate from the bat. If you take a guy who has a 6% walk rate, 24% strikeout rate, and really bad batted ball quality, you're talking about Victor Robles.
And I'm not doing that anymore.
I'm not doing that anymore.
I've kicked that habit. That's for everyone else. So yeah, you keep the tweets coming when Vic runs into his first home run of the season on June 22nd. That's fine. You can tweet at me. I get a good chuckle out of that. But
yeah, man, I mean, if
Ruiz,
on
the rundown,
if Ruiz hits 15 homers this year and has a 330 OBP, man, please make me eat crow.
Oh, but he'll do it. Maybe he'll do it one time. He'll do the one Victor Robles season, and everybody else can have their dum-dum year or years where they believe. So tread very carefully here. I think what it is, it's more of a desperation play for speed, right? You're building your foundation. Maybe you have everything else in good shape. You got your closers already.
Like,
you got plenty of pitching. You got power. You're like, I need speed. You're cut in this range. It's like Esteury Ruiz could be the 30-plus steal guy that bails you out, or he's not eligible in the outfield, or John Birdie is available later. So if you're in that situation, are you more likely to throw that dart at Ruiz, or are you more likely to throw that dart at John Birdie?
I could also see, this could be a real go-go A's team. You're talking about, if they do start like Laureano, Pache, Ruiz in the outfield, even Capel can run. They could just really be a running team. That's to me, it's crazy that Ramón Laureano and Esteury Ruiz are close in ADP. I will take Ramón Laureano every day of the week, and he might not get you 44 stolen bases. But if he's trying to run his way out of Oakland, and honestly, I talk to him a lot, he is.
Should have caffeinated himself out of Oakland too.
Yeah, right. Remember that last year? I was like, man, there's nobody here. He's like, I know, I'm getting into caffeine.
I think I'd get along really well with Ramón Laureano.
He's pretty funny. I like him, but I think he'll do whatever it takes to get noticed by the rest of baseball. I could see him stealing a lot of bags this year. So I'd much rather. And then Laureano's just a better hitter. I just believe his power way more.
Yeah. He has some of the typical flaws you find for players in this range. Strikes out a little too much, doesn't walk as much as you'd like him to. But the combination of power and speed is real. It's supported by that barrel rate, 10.3% barrel rate for his career. He hits the ball hard in the right angles enough to get to that power consistently, and is on a bad enough team to run as much as he wants to run. Therefore, you're getting really good value. Maybe a 2015 season is coming. He's definitely on my radar. I think he's a good value in this range. Some other players that go around this cluster. Lourdes Gurriel Jr. Big power outage last year. Had a wrist injury. Now he goes to Arizona.
It's not very good for power. It's not. He didn't go somewhere that's going to be that's going to help his power.
Yeah, I think we were talking to Caitlin McGrath, our Blue Jays writer, during one of the 3-0 shows, and she had suggested that he was trying to hit more like his brother Yuli. Like that was part of the conscious approach change. The injury made it really hard to know, like, did he just go too far, or was he just unable to hit for some power while also, putting the ball in play more often? But yeah, you look at the park differences. It's not good. I think it's home runs in particular where he's going to lose something in that park, because Chase Field, ever since they put the humidor in, has played either neutral or even a little pitcher friendly.
It's pitcher friendly, yeah.
Yeah,
I would guess it's pitcher friendly. Just
over
from watching a lot of games there.
3-year window for right-handed hitters, it's got a park factor of 80 from StatCast for homers. That is not what you're looking for. So even if he gets some power back, the power bounce back from Gurriel is probably going to be pretty modest.
Yeah, and we've got two sort of very similar cases, and I know I already sort of professed my love for Andrew Benintendi in the last episode, but we got two similar cases with Lourdes Gurriel Jr. and Andrew Benintendi in terms of 1-year power disappearals, whatever.
Losses? What kind of losses?
Yeah, disappearances.
Outages?
Outages there. That's much better. Outages. It's nice when you write because you can erase. Anyway, Gurriel and Benintendi, I think, are similar cases. They both have pretty good plate approaches. They both, don't chase too much. I mean, Gurriel has that chase in his history, but he makes a lot of contact, takes some walks. I think Benintendi's plate approach is a little bit better than Gurriel's, frankly. And then the park, much better. I take Chicago. I take the sell over. What's the Arizona one called?
Chase Field
any day. So, and then Benintendi even talking about trying to unlock that power. I'm going to take Benintendi over Gurriel for sure.
All right. So you like Benintendi in this range. We talked about Conforto a little bit when he signed with the Giants. He stands out to us as probably more of a potential max volume player, health permitting, for the Giants, since they mix and match at so many other places. Gavin Lux goes in this range. We're going to save him for one of the middle infield previews because he's second base and outfield eligible now, could become shortstop eligible again over the course of the season. But we have these other guys, Bryan De La Cruz, Christopher Morel, tough players to figure out because, like some of the guys we talked about at the beginning of the episode, the playing time could evaporate if they don't take advantage of the opportunity they have right now. Morel's a few years younger, got to the big leagues a little quicker than some people might have expected just based on the upper level production in the minor leagues. But I'm curious if anything you've seen in their profiles makes you want to have them on your rosters this year, maybe as your fifth outfielder.
When I'm shopping for a fifth outfielder, this is the one argument I can make for Esteury Ruiz, and I'm seeing Esteury Ruiz and NSC at 236, so he's actually more in this crew of outfielders: Bryan De La Cruz, Esteury Ruiz, and who are you saying? Christopher Morel. I might take them as my fifth and sixth outfielders. I kind of like them because I'm just shopping for upside. And if they don't have the playing time, or if they're scuffling, they're not very likely to stay on my roster all year. And I think the difference between them, I like them and like a Jock Pederson, is that they could establish themselves as playing every day. Their upside is higher than a Jock Pederson. And that's what I think I'm looking for more there, especially since they steal bases. I feel like a Jock Pederson type is just going to be available on the wire. Seth Brown, Jock Pederson. There's like always a guy who pops, for not great batting average, some homers, and not playing every day. Kind of like these lefty platoon types, right? I think those guys you can find any given year. A guy who could be playing in center field and could hit, 15 homers and steal 40 bags like Ruiz, like, okay, I can talk myself into that and then have some sort of action plan for how am I going to cut him? When am I going to cut him? Is he actually the guy I pick as my fifth outfielder and I'm going to pick somebody boring after him? Let me see if I can identify that. Jesse Winker, Austin Hayes, Austin Meadows, Lane Thomas, even. I just called him boring. So if I could take Ruiz as my fifth outfielder and then take someone boring behind him and actually for the first couple of weeks put the boring guy in and push Ruiz down to the bench. I've done this sort of thing in AL only leagues where you actually spend money on a prospect hoping he gets sent down, and then you can put him on your bench, and then you can put somebody boring that you took in the reserve rounds into your roster. Sometimes you have to do that because the exciting upside guys will cost a little bit more. So that's the only argument I can make for Ruiz. As much as I don't like him, he obviously has more upside than Jock Pederson, who goes in the same range. He obviously has more upside than Austin Hayes and Jesse Winker. But I could see pairing them. So Bryan De La Cruz, I like, from a batted ball standpoint, the hit tool is decent. And I think they're going to need him in terms of who can play center. He played enough center last year, just one game more than he played in right. And it was pretty much 30-30-30, the center, right and left. But at the same time, next year, who do you want playing center field for you in Miami? I think it's Bryan De La Cruz.
Yeah, it's De La Cruz ahead of JJ Bleday. They played him Bleday out there more than I would have expected. Their outfield is really gross. I mean,
Abisail Garcia is a DH along with Jorge Soler for me because the roots are so bad. So they have two DHs that are currently atop the left and right field thing. So I kind of want to have an okay center field defense. So, and given that Soler or Garcia should really be playing DH, I feel like De La Cruz's playing time is fairly safe, given that he's an okay defender. He's a capable defender, you know? So I think he'll play somewhere, and I think he'll be a slightly above league average bat. Might be better to have him as your sixth outfielder so that you can play him away from home. I don't know what his actual splits were. Don't tell me what his actual splits were. I'm not even going to look at them. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what his actual splits were. Don't tell me he hit better at home. I don't care. Like, it's a terrible park. I would rather play him on the field, on the road.
So the Morel playing time situation, I think, is a little bit tougher to buy into right now because the Dansby Swanson addition pushes Nico Hoerner back to second base. Nick Madrigal is a utility guy now. He's not your DH. You could end up with some kind of Hosmer, Mervis, first base DH combo where they just rotate those two spots and they hold all that playing time. And then it kind of comes down to Morel maybe at third over Patrick Wisdom. It just kind of looks like he's a super utility guy because with Happ and Bellinger and Suzuki in the outfield, those guys aren't going to get a lot of days off. Maybe it's Bellinger against lefties, and that's Morel in center field for those spots. Then he picks someone else to alternate playing time with elsewhere in the lineup. But I just think compared to De La Cruz, it's a little harder to see how Morel gets to a full-time role this year.
He played all over. 57 games in center, 33 at second, 18 at third, 13 at short, 2 at DH, 1 in left field. He also kind of profiles that way with the bat, maybe an 8% walk rate, 32% strikeout rate, 18% swinging strike rate.
It's a lot
is
of
really
strikes.
Big.
Yeah.
The batted ball quality was good. 13% barrel rate, 113 max EV. The athleticism is good. He runs the bases well. He was an asset on the base pass. He was an asset as a player, almost a 2-win player in 2/3 of a season. So basically a league average player. This is a team that needs league average players. I tend to think he'll win the battle at third because Patrick Wisdom is a right-hander who last year was 147. He was 47% better than league average against lefties and 11% worse than league average against righties. I know that's a 1-year platoon split, but this is a guy who has a lot of swing and miss. He's a righty. He's 31. He's not part of the future in that league, in that team. He was only 4% better than league average across the board. He is not a good defender. And so this is my argument for Patrick Wisdom as basically splitting time with Eric Hosmer as the DH, Mervis as the first baseman, Morel as the third baseman, and maybe some sort of a fight between Morel, Hoerner, and Madrigal for a start, because I think Hoerner has the arm for third. Madrigal doesn't, but you could see a Hoerner, Swanson, Madrigal infield that wouldn't have much power. So that's why I tend to think Morel is the third baseman and Madrigal is the new utility guy. And he would be a great utility guy, I think, except for the fact that his arm is a bit of a noodle. So maybe the arm will matter. Maybe Morel's arm will make him the utility guy in a weird way. But that's actually where I see the battle is between Morel, Hoerner, and Madrigal.
You mentioned Jock Pederson just a moment ago. I think on the leaderboard of outfielders we discussed on part 2 and part 3, third in barrel rate last year. And I think the limiting factor for Jock Pederson is the way in which the Giants are going to use him. I don't think he has the same path as Mitch Haniger and Michael Conforto to play a lot more than he did last year. 433 plate appearances last season. We've seen Jock go over 500 once since 2016. So usually the high 400s is the most you're going to get. He's optimally used, so you get a better batting average and a better OBP and probably better
much better in
stats.
daily leagues. Like he's a much more asset in daily leagues than weekly leagues. In weekly leagues, 433 PAs, even though he didn't miss that much time, 433 PAs in 134 games is a weird combo. It's like, oh, he got subbed out. He played 4 or 5 games a week. That's just really hard to put into your roster. It's okay to have as a bench guy, especially if you've got a weekend and you say, oh, there's a weekend, I'm going to put him in on the weekend. But do you need to roster him all the time? There are going to be other guys you could stream that could do that. And another thing that comes up with Jock Pederson is he played 102 games in left field. I don't think he should ever play left field again. I don't know. It's a bit of a blip because this guy used to play center. He also used to look different. His body was different. And now he looks like a Schlemiel out there. And there was enough where beat reporters were asking, around about his body. I don't mean to body shame people, but we are here to appraise athletes, and he did not look like an athlete. And he
looked different. He just looked a lot different than when he broke into the league. Plenty of players change over time. This isn't
right. So he looks more like a DH now, is my point. And he hasn't been DHing for a really long time in his career. And so he's going to go from 1 year of 120 games played in left field to next year, or 102, that's going to flip completely. He's going to play 102 games at DH and 14 games in left field if Mitch Haniger and Michael Conforto are healthy. And so that actually is meaningful for what he does at the plate, because there is something called the DH penalty, the pinch hitting penalty. Any player is about 10% worse than you'd expect them to be if they are coming off the bench. And I even talked at length to JD Davis about it. It's in one of my columns called Caught Looking columns. And JD Davis talks about how he has to ride the bike to stay warm, right? Because he's not on the field. Well, when he's riding the bike, he's not actually looking at the field in the same lights. He's in the dark tunnel or something, right? So he rides the bike and he comes out and he's like, wow, it's so bright or whatever, right? So these are these weird little things that make it hard to DH where, okay, I won't ride the bike. I'll stay out here and stay engaged in the game. Well, then I'm cold. You know what I mean? So there's should I go take some swings downstairs? Well, then I'm downstairs. I have no idea what's going on in the game. So, every DH has to get used to it. I don't think that Jock has necessarily gotten used to it yet. Maybe he can roll. He does look like he rolls out of bed to hit. So maybe he can just roll out of bed and be 20% better than league average with the bat and be an asset in daily leagues. But I don't think I want to have a lot of Jock Pederson shares in an NFBC or weekly format, because every week I'll be like, do I play him? I don't know. There's one lefty. If he misses one game and against a righty and sits against the lefty, then I shouldn't play him this week.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think in a weekly league where you set the lineup one time, maybe I'd actually be more likely to have him there, because I think it's a headache to have a player like this with the weekend swap where you can play the matchups, but that burns a roster spot. You have to plan for that. And I like to use rosters a bit differently. I like to have more positional flexibility than what Jock Pederson currently offers. Let's play a game called Good Oatmeal, Bad Oatmeal, because this is very appropriate for this range of the draft board. Good oatmeal being like a nice bowl of steel cutouts where you've got the fruits that you want on there, maybe some nuts, a little dusting of brown sugar. Bad oatmeal being more like something that would come out of a nacho cheese style dispenser at a continental breakfast at a hotel that you really don't want to stay at because, I don't know, maybe you're at a soccer tournament in the middle of nowhere. Just to give you a really idea of what bad oatmeal is to me. Randal Grichuk, good oatmeal or bad oatmeal with what looks like another clear run of playing time in Colorado?
Good in that I would love to play him half the time. I think it's fine. And fewer matchups against the Dodgers and fewer games in San Francisco with the new schedule. I know he's boring.
If we have Jock Pederson problems because of the lefty righty usage, and we have Grichuk is for home park, road park, I think I'd be out on Grichuk too then in those formats. It'd be more like a daily league sort of thing.
But it's just much more obvious. You don't even have to go look at a schedule and plan out all the starting pitchers. Is he in Colorado? Is he not in Colorado? And I gave a talk about the balanced schedule being a big deal this year, and our friend Kevin Hastings, a listener and friend out in Hawaii, mentioned that he looked through it and he found a way that he could roster a player from Colorado every week. That there weren't any weeks where they were completely away from home. So that's the NFBC format where you're like, you have the weekend. And so that's a weekly lineup situation where it looks like he's going to be useful every week, either in the meaty part of the portion or the weekend. And so if I can play him either the first half or the second half of every week, then he has a place on my roster.
All right.
It just seems easier than like Jock Pederson, who you're playing around with. Home is not great for power. And then righty lefty stuff where you have to kind of look at the schedule and what happens if a pitcher sits down and the whole, you know what I mean? Like they move everybody up, or, you know what I mean? Like pitching rotations are not set in stone as much as they're playing in Colorado on Friday. You know what I mean? They'll be like, oh, today we're just going to play in San Francisco instead of Colorado.
Sure. You don't have to worry about that, but you're getting better core skills from Pederson. So I think they're actually really similar. They just create their roster problem in a different way. I think if I had to roster one, I'd actually take Jock over Grichuk. I understand that Grichuk is the easier player to roster because you do, I think, more clearly know when exactly he should be in the lineup. Will Myers, good Oatmeal or bad Oatmeal with the move to Cincinnati?
Good. I just filed a piece with Trent Rosecrans for The Athletic about the 80th percentile outcomes for the Reds and their players. His is fairly exciting. At 32, I think he's still sort of within reach of a bounce back kind of good season. He's well motivated. It's a great park to fit for his power. And I think the Reds will play him nearly every day to start the season as they want to be like, hey, we're trying to be good. And then even as they get bad, they're motivated to play him every day to trade him. So I see him as pretty clearly above the sort of TJ Friedel, Stuart Fairchild, Jake Fraley, Mike Ciani, Nick Solak hodgepodge that will play behind Nick Senzel in center and left. So I think Myers is, when you look at the Giants thing and you say, oh, I think Conforto and Haniger will play every day because the rest of this roster is so, sort of mix and match and upheaval. That's how I see when I look at Cincinnati. I'm like, they're going to play Jonathan India, Spencer Steer, and Will Myers every day. Mm-hmm. That's how I see it.
Oh, I'm with you. I think this is good Oatmeal. I think Will Myers is probably the biggest park factors winner among hitters when you look at the difference for right-handed power at Petco versus Great American Ballpark.
There's another one that comes right behind him in Jesse Winker. I think he has a similar sort of situation there. Winker showed up in the top 10 in terms of batters who swing at strikes and don't swing at balls. If you kind of combine those skills, he did that last year despite having a terrible health year. There's a couple things there that are interesting. Jeff Zimmerman had a piece about the change in age-adjusted OPS. If you, depending on what body part you were on the OPS, on the DL for, on the IL for, it's a little bit old, 2014, but number one is elbow. So if you had elbow surgery and you were coming back, this is bad news for Trevor Story as an example. It's minus 56 points in OPS compared to what you would be projected for. So that's a bad one. Second on the list, surprisingly, is the neck. 30 points in OPS. That is what Jesse Winker just had surgery on. And so that's a little bit disconcerting. Another part is there's some reporting coming out of there, out of Seattle by Divish, Ryan Divish, the beat reporter there, saying that he didn't want to like lift with teammates. He didn't really participate. But I can pair that with some of my own reporting because I talked to Jesse late in the season. I've been talking to him for a long time. And, what I got from him was just, I'm hurt and I'm trying to help the team, but I know it looks terrible and no one seems to like me. And like, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He's a guy who just came into a new situation. He's supposed to be good. And then he wasn't. And then they've got all these Mariners have all these like young players that sort of came up together. Right. So it was like Cal Raleigh, Julio Rodriguez, all these guys, they're going to like each other and they're going to be like, oh man, who's this stupid veteran they brought in who's terrible? And, and then if you're hurt, you're just trying to like do something about the hurt and just trying to, and before the surgery late in the season, I said, when I look at the numbers, it looks like you're hurt. And he's like, well, I don't want to like give that an excuse and please don't go on the record with this, but like, I am hurt. And I was like, oh, so you're going to get that right in the offseason? He's like, yeah, I'm going to get that right. And he said there were some mechanical things that he wants to get better. So I don't know. If he's hurt all last season, that's going to affect all the numbers. It's going to affect the projections. And now he's supposedly right, I guess. Well, it's a risky one, but I like the risk reward proposition at this point in the draft.
Yeah, we talked about taking a few shots on injured players. And when you're talking about someone going after pick 250, that's an easy cut if you don't like what you see early on. I think even with the injury, a 7.6% barrel rate last year, which was way down for him, is still better than it was from 2017 to 2019, when the problem was he's got a good hit tool, but doesn't hit for power. So with health, I mean, the projections actually make an adjustment almost. I don't think it's because of what you were talking about with Jeff's research necessarily with this specific injury, but the projections don't put him all the way back to that low 800s, even 900 OPS range. They have him in the high 700s. They've got high teens power in less than a full season. That's a very conservative projection. If he's healthy, he's another big park factors winner too. So he's been one of those dinged up players that I'm looking at as a good rebound target for this year. I liked him even if he stayed in Seattle, not knowing the teammate situation maybe wasn't great. That he's in Milwaukee, this boosts Park situation a lot. He can be the primary DH there and could be a big part of that offense, maybe getting a little bit better.
Going back to seeing pitchers he used to see too. I mean, if the in terms of familiarity, the Parks he used to know. So
yeah. Austin Hayes is a little bit young to be Oatmeal, but I think that's the kind of player he's shaping up to be. We thought maybe in 2021 when that barrel rate spiked that we were getting the exciting young player that Hayes was as a prospect. Instead, he just looks like more of a steady contributor. It is important to remember the changes in Baltimore were significant on players' power output, but the underlying numbers, the swing decisions, the barrel rates, those things still look a lot like they did pre-2021 for Hayes. So I think we're going to look back at 2021 and say that level of power when he was on kind of like a 25 to 30 home run sort of pace over a full season, that's probably a level we're not going to see from him again, even if he ends up playing somewhere else down the road.
It is interesting to think that we could be looking at some other guys in small samples and say, 9% barrel rate, 110 max EV, like that's pretty solid. And yet it might be their one outlier a year. So, that's why regression is important. That's why projections are important. But there is also a little softness about that, like a 11, 12% barrel rate. That's like top of the league, 115 and 114 max EV. That's more top of the league. Even in that good year in 2021, 9% barrel rate, 110 max EV. That's good rather than great. So, not too surprising given his past numbers that he regressed a little bit there. Maybe he could take a step forward, but he's 27. So, if he does have another good year, it could be his peak year. If he does have another good year, you're in a keeper league, I would sell him because I think he's established that he's good, not great. 5 to 7% better than league average of the bat, 20 homers at most, 250 average, 310 OBP at most. So pretty good player, but I also don't know that he would play center field for anybody. So this is the kind of player that just honestly is kind of fungible in the game, where he'll get 1-year deals and stuff like that on the way out.
Yeah, if he gets an opportunity to play center field and really like shows that he can be above average there, that changes a lot for his long-term outlook. But with Mullins in Baltimore, he's not really going to get that opportunity anytime soon. And as he ages,
Could
it's
be a
going to be
trade
less
candidate
likely.
because of it. Yeah, like if maybe somebody else thinks they could play center for them.
Mm-hmm. Brandon Marsh kind of goes in this range. I'm taking the Oatmeal tag down off of YouTube. I think we saw a few interesting adjustments from Marsh late in the year after that trade to Philadelphia. I think there were always things in the profile that we liked. A good bit of swing and miss, but a guy that has certainly taken his share of walks everywhere he's been, even as he's tried to adjust to big league pitching. The walk rate hasn't been terrible, even though it's been down from where it was throughout his time in the minors. But
he kind of became more aggressive
rate.
in Philadelphia, right? The walk rate went down there, and it helped his strikeout rate. He sort of, aggressed his way out of any sort of called strike threes,
Right. Is this a better version of Brandon Marsh in the long run? Is this more sustainable for him as a hitter?
I have had some shares. He was on my record-setting AL labor squad last year, and he did what I'd hoped he would do: is double-digit homers and double-digit steals. And he played 461 plate appearances. He's in line to be the starting center fielder for the Phillies next year. I think he's going to play all year. I think though that he's a deep leaguer, a guy who will do double-digit homers and steals again. I just don't see that next level. I don't think he's a great 15-teamer.
So you do not want him as your outfielder number 5.
Well, you're like, oh, he took a step forward with contact rate and with strikeout rate with Philly. Well, it was still 30%, and it now, instead of being paired with a 7% walk rate, it was paired with a 4% walk rate. So it's like, okay, all in all, yes, he was a little better with Phillies, but how much of that was BABIP? He had a 340 BABIP in Anaheim and a 398 in Philadelphia. Otherwise, fewer strikeouts, more fewer walks, a little bit more power, not really supported by barrel rate. I don't know. I see someone who's too aggressive and doesn't really have a great hit tool.
So I think even if this is all we have for Brandon Marsh for skills, if he doesn't get any better, which is very possible, but at the same time, we've only seen 700 plate appearances in the big leagues, and the first 200 or so came off of shoulder surgery when he was debuting with the Angels in 2021.
True.
The Phillies need him in center field. Trading Vierling away, traded away one of their best alternatives to play that spot.
They've got nobody else.
So because of his glove, even if he's stuck in the bottom third of that lineup all year, which he might be stuck in the bottom third of the lineup, even if he gets a little better as a hitter, he's going to play because of his glove. The sprint speed's good. He's going to steal some bases. There's just legit batting average risk. But if you told me Brandon Marsh is going to match the production of Harrison Bader, who goes 100 picks earlier, I'd say, yeah, I guess that's possible. He's a good reason to not take Bader where Bader goes. The key difference for me is I think Bader getting that park boost is possibly a path to more power. But I actually think I like
Philly's
almost
a pretty
as
good
much.
park too. Yeah.
So I think I'm talking myself out of Bader into Brandon Marsh right now as kind of a fallback option. I think I would play him as an outfield 5 option in a 15 team. Like, because cheap speed from guys that aren't going to lose their job is actually a nice little thing to find as late as he goes.
And some of the like, I do like some of the veterans here a lot more than some of the young guys, in that, I've already said I liked Will Myers. There was, I forget who else that I've said I've liked so far. And then after Marsh, I think Austin Meadows is due for a bounce back. There's other kind of some veterans down here that even Charlie Blackmon, that's a plus hit tool in Colorado, seems useful. None of them are going to steal bases. None of the veterans.
No,
and so
those guys don't run.
If you're looking for that, how about Garrett Mitchell instead of your man Brandon Marsh?
I would take Marsh. The Brewers have more competition for Mitchell if he falters, and I think there's still enough swing and miss in Mitchell's game where it's
actually fairly similar.
They're very similar profiles. Yeah. I'd rather take the guy that's been in the big leagues a little bit longer, because at least we know he hasn't fallen on his face, and Mitchell could fall on his face, go down.
You could read that two ways. Where it's like, you want the guy who's been in the big leagues longer. Well, we have more of a track record that says maybe he's not good. With Mitchell, it could go either way, right? Like he could have a 22%, 24% strikeout rate next year.
He could. Look.
Whereas we're pretty sure that Marsh is going to have a 30% strikeout rate next year.
I actually wouldn't be opposed to having both players on the roster. If Marsh is my last outfielder and Mitchell's my first one off the bench, and
that's 2 bites at the same apple. Yeah,
2 guys that have similar functions. Good defensive value, speed, a little bit of power, developing skills. Maybe
one of them is good enough.
Yeah. The other guy that goes in this range for speed purposes is Jose Siri. Defense might get him a lot of playing time.
Yeah, but
big flaws.
I like if there's 3 of these, if these are the 3 guys we're comparing, like I just don't see, like he had a 35% strikeout rate in AAA one year. He's had 30% strikeout rates in AA and AAA. Like there's no, like I don't think there's any way that he has below a 30% strikeout rate. And that's what I want out of one of these 3 guys. So if I'm going to roster 2 of these 3 guys, then I want one of them to sneak underneath, even at 28 or 27. Like, you know, and I just don't think that Siri's going to do it. I mean, he has decent batted ball stats, and I think they do need to play him in center, like you're saying. And the projection on Siri is pretty nice. Even the bat, like they're both saying, like 13. Steamer says 17 homers and 20 stolen bases. It's just an awful batting average. If you get your batting average up all year, maybe Siri's your pick. But I would rather take Marsh and Mitchell just because I think there's a chance they don't hit 210.
Man, I look at the difference between Steamer and the bat on the average. Steamer 239, the bat X 213, and the bat has 210. That's why. That's a big spread.
I believe the batting average.
Extra Ks from the bat and the bat X too. Big part of that difference.
17.5% swing strike rate, man. I mean, Marsh was 18.
Yeah,
and Garrett Mitchell was 12. No, Marsh is 13. So yeah, 18% swing strike rate is a big one. That's a big number.
All right, we got time for a couple of late darts. Outfielders beyond pick 300 that you actually like. A couple names we talked about earlier. Jared Kelenic now going in this range. We've got Dylan Carlson going in this range. Trent Grisham, who I liked going into last year. He's way down here after a disappointing 2022. Jake Fraley, who might play a ton in Cincinnati, has that power speed combo. I think he's pretty interesting in this range, but it could be any of those guys going even later. Prospects, who are your late outfield darts right now?
I'm going to go plate approach, guys, where I like the plate approach. And Trent Grisham, I think, just a little bit of aggression would serve him well. He had some months last year where he was useful. I know that they're thinking about trading. That he's been rumored to be traded, but I also think that team probably needs him in center. I don't know. Trent, the Tatis coming back makes things interesting. I don't think Ha-Seong Kim can play center, but I think Tatis can play center. So I guess there's some issue there. But he steals bases. I like his plate approach generally. Then also down here I see who was it now? Max Kepler, I think he'll be a huge beneficiary of the shift rules. And if that batting average ticks north at all, he becomes so much more playable. So Max Kepler is a guy. And then a little bit of a long shot, but a lovely kind of guy to have on your bench to see if anything has changed is Dylan Carlson. We've spent a lot of time speaking about the bad things that Dylan Carlson does on this podcast and how, I've made some comparisons where he looks really bad in terms of barrel rates and stuff. His batted ball stats are not good. However, Nolan Arenado is his teammate. Nolan Arenado spent the last 2 off seasons, this one and the last one, at Driveline, doing, partially at Driveline, partially in his own spot, doing whatever he can to up his bat speed. And if you give Dylan Carlson bat speed, I think everything changes. Lars Nootbaar is his teammate. Lars Nootbaar went to Driveline and upped his bat speed with over and underload bat, weighted bats. So, if Dylan Carlson, I haven't heard that about Dylan Carlson this offseason, but you've got 2 very high profile teammates who are like one is an MVP and the other is surpassing you on the depth chart, I think you would take notice in what they're doing. And if you gave Dylan Carlson plus bat speed, he could actually be better than Newt Barr, or at least be similar in that he makes a lot of contact, has a good sense of the zone, has a good all fields approach. And all these things would be so much better if he just had bat speed. So, I'm willing to take Dylan Carlson and get the early EV, barrel rate numbers and make a decision on him quickly.
Yeah, I still like the chances of Carlson being a good fantasy player. I like Alek Kirilloff a lot in this range as well. I just think there's a ton of raw power there. Wrist injuries have slowed him down. We saw really good numbers from him at AAA. The brief time he was healthy last year. The numbers in the big leagues were still a little underwhelming, but he hasn't even had 400 big league plate appearances yet. I think you're talking about an easy 20 home run sort of bat and a guy that actually controls the zone just well enough to maybe be someone that doesn't hurt you in OBP leagues. On the surface, it looks like he kind of hurts you in that category. So probably a little underrated because of all the injuries. And I think that's a big part of why he was hitting the ball on the ground so much last year too. I don't think he's a 55% true talent ground ball rate guy. I think he's going to be someone that lifts the ball consistently and is rewarded for doing that.
Who's that again?
Alek Kirilloff.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a wrist surgery, and like I said, wrist was third behind elbow and neck in adjusted change in OPS. However, it's such a wrist thing for him for so long for Kirilloff that maybe just getting it right is just all he needs. You know what I mean? Like it was really something that bothered him all year. There's a couple names later on. Tommy Pham, I think it's just something where we just need to know where he lands. There are still a few situations where he could land. You could be like, oh, there's some decent playing time there. So I want to know where he lands. Oscar Colas, it's funny. If Pham ended up in Chicago, I would say that Pham might play every day and Colas, starts the year in the minor leagues again. If Pham doesn't end up in Chicago, I think Colas could start in the outfield all year for them. So as it stands now, Oscar Colas is a good shot in the dark. He's 24. His minor league numbers may look really exciting, but he's been pretty old for those levels. It's because of his backstory. It's not that they kept him in the minor league levels because he wasn't good or whatever. It's because he's Cuban and he played in Japan, and you know what I mean? Like they moved him as aggressively as they could, and he was good at every level. But he was also, it's no fault of his own, he was old. So, I do think it's interesting to see, here's a huge spread between a 230 average from the bat, 11 or 12 homers to a 260 average and 16 or 17 homers from Steamer. But that describes the range of outcomes for him. And if he's more the latter than the former, then he's going to start every day and be honestly could be like a rookie of the year candidate. Why not? He might hit the ground running at 24 with all this history, left-hander, shift rules, opportunity, it all lines up. So I don't want to say that I think Colas is, one of the top prospects in baseball, but everything lines up for him to be a good first-year candidate in fantasy.
Basically, just has to outperform Gavin Sheets for an everyday opportunity right now. That doesn't seem like a bar that's too high to clear. So I'm with you.
Once you consider defense too, Sheets has good batted ball quality, but could end up in a platoon at first and DH where, I think his defensive abilities line up better.
So that's going to mark the end of our outfield preview. This is the end of part 3. There is no part 4. I know there's some more names that we could get to. We'll probably answer mailbag questions.
Alek Thomas, 406.
That's nice value. Nice. Real nice.
Tyrone Taylor, 411.
I'm a little less excited about Tyrone Taylor, but I'm in on Alek Thomas. It makes sense given what we said about
Sánchez,
Jake McCarthy.
431.
Oh, you're never going to give up that dream, are you?
But anyway, this is a good place to go shopping for your final pick in the draft. They're going to be there's going to be much more interesting outfielders. That's why I always want to be kind of conservative at every level of the outfield when I'm picking, because I just want to make sure that, I know that there's going to be 2 potential bench bats that I'll want to put on my team in the outfield. So I always try to make sure that I am getting representative guys in every tier, but I sort of leave it open where I could take maybe even 3 guys for me my 5th outfielder and see which one works out.
Yeah, I love throwing darts in this range because you can see a lot of what could go right type players on the board. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. You can find Eno on Twitter at EnoCeres. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. Get a subscription to The Athletic for just $2 a month for the first year at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. We are back with you next week.
Thanks for listening.